I just want to say I appreciate the opportunity to speak with y'all today. On these slides, do y'all recognize the guy on the left? Do you remember Lieutenant Dan from Forrest Gump? Okay, who famously came back from the Vietnam War, a paraplegic. He and Forrest went shrimping, and as this massive storm approaches, he scrambles up the rigging of his shrimp trawler, shakes his fist at the sky, and says, "You call that a storm?" All right, so I wanted to compare him to a real-life fisherman. On the right, we have a crew member on a trawler who has scrambled out onto the trawl door, probably to repair the rigging of some sort. I don't know if you can tell, he's doing all this with a cigarette in his mouth. Real fishermen are not like Lieutenant Dan, okay? They are in no position to tempt fate. Commercial fishing is already ranked by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as the #1 most dangerous profession in the United States. Fishermen are not only on the front line of storms, of hurricanes, they feel directly the ravages of our global economy. They feel directly the pressures of development in coastal areas that are getting increasingly tourist-oriented and high dollar. So what I'm talking about today is the impact of storms and the response to storms on behalf of the seafood industry of North Carolina, and the more general category of working waterfronts. That's the what we call the fish houses, which are the packing houses where fresh seafood is offloaded, as well as all the associated supply chain, trucking routes and the railways that do the repair to the vessels and all those associated businesses to getting a successful seafood industry up and running. So the name of my study, it's looking at the impact of working waterfronts on our seafood industry, and a shout out to the North Carolina Sea Grant and their community collaborative program for funding this study. They bring together members of the academic community with people in the community, and that's where the magic happens. So I'm undertaking this study with Susan West of Hatteras Island. Susan is a writer and a member of the fishing industry, fishing community, and Sarah Mirabilio of Sea Grant, and Scott Baker. So we've got a good team. What we're doing first and foremost in this study is we basically take the temperature of the fishing industry, and we've done this about every 5 or 6 years. This is our 3rd round. We literally count the number of seafood wholesale places that are left in North Carolina. And we started this project during the housing boom when we were losing fish houses left and right because of property being sold for, high-end condos and whatnot. Or actually, there were a lot of different reasons people were getting out of the industry. But we were losing a lot of seafood packing houses. We were losing a lot of dock area. We were losing in general a lot of the public's access to the water. So we started this study, and we've tried to keep going and check in with the industry about every 5 or 6 years. So on this map, you can see all the green markers are fish houses, these places that pack North Carolina seafood that are still in business. And the red marks, and this is just a screen grab. Of course, I could zoom in and there'd be far more shown. The red marks are businesses that have closed within the last 10 years. I can just in general tell you that since the year 2000, we have lost about 1/3 of the number of packing houses in North Carolina. And we have lost over half of our commercial fishermen. So the North Carolina seafood industry is definitely contracting. It's definitely getting smaller. And it's also undergoing what is happening on a national level. It's consolidating, okay? So you have, fewer hands controlling the industry. What I'm going to talk about today, though, and we're in the midst of this study, is not so much the inventory, but what we're finding out about the industry's response to storms, and how they prepare for storms, and how overall how the storms impacted the industry. We all have heard, what was the overall economic damage to North Carolina? How many billions? Was it $17 billion? I think it was $17 billion overall that Florence exacted on North Carolina. And we don't really know how much of that is represented by the seafood industry. We don't know the number of, the money damage to the North Carolina seafood industry. But there was a survey by Sea Grant of the shellfish aquaculture industry, and that estimates just shellfish aquaculture underwent a $10 million, suffered $10 million in damage. In this storm, in the wake of this storm, Governor Cooper made available, let's see if I can remember this. I'm bad with numbers. Made available relief funds to North Carolina commercial fishermen, and that was of tremendous help to the fishermen that could show a loss. I will say that that's unusual. I think that, from what I could tell and looking back, the last storm that made relief funds available to the fishing industry was Floyd in the year 2000. So, this was a big help. The money did not go to the seafood processors and packers. It just went to the fishermen. The processors and packers, if they hopefully had insurance on their businesses. I was told by one seafood packer that docks are not covered by insurance. I'm not sure if that's true or not. Is that true? So it looks like they had to do a lot of repair on their own dime. You can see from these slides some of the damages that the seafood industry experienced, a lot of dock damage. And if somebody can come up with a hurricane-resilient dock, you'd be doing a huge community service, because they become quite a hazard. They end up everywhere. They're floating in the water, and it's terrible. Let's see, some of the seafood, the fish houses themselves, a lot of people had flooding. One business in Pamlico County had an entire office building sucked out into the river. They said they showed up and they don't even know where it went. They couldn't even find any, that was all their computers, all their records, the whole building just gone. Some vessels sustained damage, although fishermen really know how to prepare for storms. A lot of fishermen will move their boats to safe areas. They might put their boats up in a creek and what they call spider web them. So the boats are tied in the center of the creek so they're not going to be bashed against a dock or a piling. There was plenty of gear damage. Fishermen did stress, we're undertaking the survey right now, that more accurate weather forecasting has been tremendously helpful. So they, in terms of Hurricane Florence, had plenty of heads up to get their nets out of the water, to get their pots out of the water. So, they didn't sustain the damage that they could have in that case. I would say the biggest negative impact to the seafood industry was the fact that basically the whole supply chain, business activity was shut down, for an average of 4 to 6 weeks. Some of the seafood dealers say that they've never experienced 3 or 4 solid days of sustained easterly blow. And of course, the boats can't come back if the docks are gone, and in many cases, the docks were gone. The fish trucks can't come in to pick up the product when the roads are destroyed, and plenty of roads were flooded and or destroyed. So, there was no business. And in the fall, that's typically the busiest time for the seafood industry. So that represented a big loss. I'm not going to belabor the point about water quality because, we've had some great presentations on that. But you can, here's just another look at that horrible plume of, the toxic soup that flowed into the sounds. And what that does is it pushes all the shrimp out of the sounds, a lot of the fish, or it kills off marine life. And even once of course, shellfish areas are closed because they're not healthy for human consumption to eat anything out of those waters. But once shellfish areas are reopened, the public still perceives that there's a problem. So that keeps markets depressed for a while in the wake of a storm. And we don't know yet what the long-term impacts on the seafood industry will be, from Hurricane Florence, but we can look back. This satellite shot is from Hurricane Floyd. And, like Florence, it was just a devastating flood. And, we had the swine and the poultry and all the other horrible things come flooding into Pamlico Sound. And the insert there, you can see that dramatic line of the toxic water coming down, the fresh water hitting the salty water of Pamlico Sound. But we do know that there are long-term impacts from Hurricane Floyd, and researchers went in and found that the benthic communities were, virtually wiped out in Pamlico Sound for quite a while after Floyd. There was, very little bottom life in some areas. The problem of hypoxia, low dissolved oxygen, which, so you get, crabs dying off, fish dying off. They just can't get the oxygen they need. This slide shows the long-term impact on one fishery, which is the blue crab fishery in Pamlico Sound. And the very dramatic drop-off, this is looking at crab landings in terms of pounds. The dramatic drop-off is right after Hurricane Floyd. And you can see that really the crab populations in Pamlico Sound haven't ever really bounced back as to the levels they were pre-Hurricane Floyd. So that's definitely a long-term impact. And fishermen will talk about how there's actually they know that there's sort of a line in the Sound, and they know everything to the west of that is going to be riddled with dead zones. So that's definitely a problem. So I just want to share a little bit of positive news in all this pertaining to the fishing industry, and that is in recovery efforts. Fishing communities might not be high on financial capital, but they are wealthy in what we social scientists call social capital, or what Karen Amspacher would say, helping each other, right? Yes, community. Social capital is, the people that we rely on, informal ties of trust, where you have built up trust among each other, and, you can, lend each other a hand when you need to. So the fishing community, these seafood wholesalers, when they see a storm coming, most of these wholesalers have these big ice rooms where they manufacture shaved ice for the vessels. They will stockpile ice, and once the hurricane hits, they know they're going to be without power. They know the community is going to be without power. So that ice is for the community, all right? Of course, it's also for any product that they still have, but they leave their doors unlocked, and they tell community members, come and get the ice you need. All right, some of the folks that we've interviewed give fuel to the community for their generators. There's just a lot of, in some ways, I guess you could call them first responders too. They're the first ones to get out there and repair docks, clear roads. Seafood companies often have heavy equipment that they then lend to clear the roads, cranes, bulldozers. There's a lot they can do, and they jump right in there and they do it. What is the message here is in terms of resiliency in fishing communities, and I know resiliency is an overused word, but I guess the fishing industry is resilient. They were resilient before resiliency was cool. And I think an important message is they are the working people of these communities. If you consider, Karen mentioned the community of Hatteras Island, which was completely cut off from the rest of the world. Hatteras Village, which was cut off during Hurricane Isabel. It was the fishing community that, they were able to come out, they were able to start doing the repair work, and that's the case in a lot of communities. They had product, these wholesale companies had product to immediately start, feeding to the community before the other relief agencies can even get there. So it's the working communities in areas, and especially in these tourist areas that are full of second homes or full of investment rental properties. It's the working community, the fishing community, that keep the lights on all year round. And they staff the fire departments and the rescue squads and everything else. So I think if there's a message here, it's let's make sure that we have policies that support a mixed economy in areas. I would say we can't live on tourist dollars alone. And the hurricanes are a real good example as to why that is. So make sure, and this was said earlier, make sure that we, keep the cost of living affordable, affordable housing and whatnot. Forrest says it's just time to sit down and close my mouth. So thank you.